During World War II, railways were the lifeline of the German war machine. Every day, thousands of locomotives hauled ammunition, tanks, food supplies, and troops across occupied Europe toward the front lines. Without these trains, the German army would struggle to maintain its rapid pace of warfare. Yet hidden within the ordinary black lumps of coal that powered these locomotives was a secret weapon devised by Allied intelligence. It looked exactly like a normal piece of coal, dusty and irregular in shape, but inside it contained something far more dangerous. This device was known as the coal torpedo. When a locomotive fireman shoveled this fake coal into the blazing furnace of a steam engine, the result was devastating. The intense heat ignited the explosive hidden inside, causing a violent blast that could destroy the locomotive's boiler. The explosion often ripped through the engine with tremendous force, damaging the train and sometimes injuring the crew. What made the weapon so terrifying was its simplicity. A single disguised lump of coal could disable an entire locomotive. Throughout the war, the Allies used these deceptive explosives to sabotage German rail transport. It was a quiet but highly effective method of warfare, one that attacked logistics rather than soldiers directly. German trains that seemed perfectly normal suddenly exploded without warning, leaving engineers baffled and fearful. This clever sabotage campaign proved that in war, even the smallest object could become a powerful weapon. The concept behind the fake coal weapon was surprisingly straightforward. Engineers working for Allied intelligence agencies designed explosive charges that could be molded to look exactly like real coal. They studied the texture, color, and shape of coal lumps used by German locomotives. Once perfected, the explosive was carefully cast into irregular shapes and coated with crushed coal dust and resin. The result was almost impossible to distinguish from genuine fuel. These devices were then smuggled into coal storage piles that supplied German railways. The operation required courage and secrecy. Resistance fighters, spies, and saboteurs risked their lives to infiltrate rail yards and supply depots. Sometimes the fake coal was slipped into barges transporting fuel. Other times it was mixed directly into stockpiles used by locomotives. When the train crew later shoveled the coal into the furnace, they unknowingly triggered a deadly trap. Inside the furnace, temperatures could exceed 1,000 degrees Celsius. The heat caused the explosive core to detonate almost instantly. Steam locomotives were particularly vulnerable because their boilers operated under immense pressure. When an explosion occurred inside the firebox, the shock could rupture pipes or crack the boiler shell. Even a small rupture could render the locomotive unusable. Repairing such damage was extremely difficult during wartime when spare parts were scarce. By destroying locomotives, the Allies disrupted German transport networks and forced them to divert resources toward repairs and security. What made the tactic especially effective was its unpredictability. German crews never knew which coal pile might contain a hidden explosive. This sabotage tactic became part of a broader Allied strategy to cripple Germany's logistical infrastructure. Military planners understood that modern warfare depended heavily on transportation networks. Tanks, artillery, and infantry units all relied on a constant flow of supplies. Railroads were the backbone of that system. If the trains stopped moving, entire armies could grind to a halt. The fake coal operation aimed to create chaos within this network without requiring large-scale bombing raids. Bombing rail yards was risky and often inaccurate, but sabotage could be carried out quietly and repeatedly. A single resistance agent placing one explosive lump into a coal pile could potentially destroy a locomotive worth enormous resources. Furthermore, locomotive explosions caused delays that rippled across the rail network. Damaged tracks had to be cleared, wreckage removed, and replacement engines brought in. These delays disrupted supply schedules and forced German commanders to adjust their operations. In some cases, critical shipments of fuel or ammunition arrived hours or even days late. During major offensives, such delays could have serious consequences. The psychological impact was equally important. Engineers and firemen began to fear their own fuel supplies. Each time they shoveled coal into the furnace, they wondered if it might explode. This fear reduced efficiency and slowed operations. Even when explosions were rare, the constant suspicion weakened morale among railway crews. The Allies recognized that sabotage was not only about physical damage, but also about undermining confidence and security within the enemy's infrastructure. The origins of the fake coal device can be traced to earlier military sabotage techniques. During the American Civil War, similar explosives disguised as coal were used to damage Confederate steamships. Decades later, military engineers refined the idea for modern warfare. By World War II, intelligence agencies such as the American Office of Strategic Services and the British Special Operations Executive had developed sophisticated sabotage tools. The coal torpedo became one of their most ingenious inventions. It required careful engineering to ensure the explosive would survive transportation and handling without detonating prematurely. Designers used strong outer casings and heat-sensitive detonators that would only activate inside a furnace. The explosive material inside the fake coal was powerful enough to create a violent shockwave. When detonated inside a steam locomotive's firebox, the blast often shattered metal components and disrupted the boiler's internal pressure system. Even if the engine was not completely destroyed, the damage usually forced it out of service for weeks. In wartime, weeks of lost service could have a significant impact on supply operations. The simplicity of the device meant saboteurs could carry several pieces hidden in pockets or bags. Because they resembled ordinary coal, they attracted little attention. This allowed agents to operate even in heavily guarded rail yards. The success of the fake coal strategy demonstrated how creativity and engineering could turn everyday objects into powerful instruments of war. Delivering the fake coal to the right location required a complex network of operatives and resistance fighters. Across occupied Europe, underground groups worked secretly against German forces. These resistance members gathered intelligence, sabotaged infrastructure, and assisted Allied operations. Coal supply chains offered an ideal opportunity for sabotage because they involved many different workers and transport stages. Coal moved from mines to rail depots, then to storage yards, and finally into locomotive tenders. At each stage, there was a chance for an operative to slip a disguised explosive into the pile. Some resistance fighters worked directly in rail yards or coal depots, giving them perfect access. Others intercepted coal shipments during transport. The key was to place the fake coal where it would eventually reach a locomotive firebox. Because the devices looked so convincing, they often blended seamlessly with real fuel. German authorities struggled to detect them. Inspecting every piece of coal was impossible due to the sheer volume needed for railway operations. Trains consumed enormous quantities of fuel daily, and delays in refueling could halt entire transport schedules. This made thorough inspections impractical. As a result, the fake coal continued to slip through security measures. Each successful sabotage operation encouraged further efforts. Resistance networks expanded their activities, smuggling more devices into rail supply chains. The campaign demonstrated the importance of cooperation between Allied intelligence and local resistance movements. Together they created a persistent threat to Germany's transportation system. When a locomotive was destroyed by a coal torpedo, the results could be dramatic. Steam engines were essentially giant pressure vessels filled with boiling water. Inside the boiler, steam pressure often exceeded hundreds of pounds per square inch. The furnace beneath the boiler burned coal to generate this steam. When an explosive detonated inside the firebox, the sudden shock could rupture critical components. In some cases, the blast cracked the boiler shell or damaged the fire tubes that carried hot gases through the water. Such damage caused the boiler to lose pressure rapidly, bringing the locomotive to an immediate halt. Sometimes the explosion also ignited surrounding coal dust, creating additional blasts or fires. Railway crews often described these incidents as mysterious mechanical failures because they occurred without warning. Investigations sometimes revealed twisted metal and shattered furnace walls. Repair crews faced a difficult task. Locomotives required specialized parts and skilled labor, both of which were increasingly scarce in wartime Germany. Factories were already stretched thin, producing tanks, aircraft, and weapons. Replacing damaged locomotives placed further strain on industrial resources. Even when repairs were possible, engines could remain out of service for long periods. This reduced the number of trains available for transport. Over time, Repeated sabotage incidents gradually weakened the overall capacity of the railway system. Though each explosion involved only a single locomotive, the cumulative effect was significant. The psychological impact of the fake coal campaign spread quickly among German railway workers. Rumours circulated about mysterious explosions inside locomotives. Some engineers believed the boilers were faulty or poorly maintained. Others suspected sabotage but had no idea how it was being carried out. Fear and suspicion began to grow. Firemen responsible for feeding coal into the furnace faced the greatest anxiety. Every shovel of coal might contain a hidden explosive. Although actual incidents were relatively rare, compared to the total number of trains operating, the uncertainty created constant tension. German authorities attempted to reassure railway crews and launched investigations into the explosions. Inspectors examined damaged locomotives and searched coal depots for signs of tampering. However, the disguised explosives were extremely difficult to identify. Their surfaces were coated with real coal dust, making them nearly indistinguishable from genuine fuel. Security measures were tightened, and guards were posted at some depots. Yet the sheer scale of the railway system made total security impossible. Germany operated thousands of locomotives across a vast network stretching from France to the Eastern Front. Monitoring every coal pile and every worker was beyond the capability of the authorities. As a result, the sense of vulnerability persisted. The campaign demonstrated how psychological warfare could amplify the effects of physical sabotage. Even a small number of successful attacks could generate widespread fear and uncertainty within critical infrastructure. Another advantage of the fake coal tactic was its cost-effectiveness. Traditional military operations such as bombing campaigns required aircraft, fuel, and large numbers of personnel. Sabotage devices, by contrast, were relatively cheap to produce. A single coal torpedo required only a small amount of explosive material and a carefully crafted outer shell. Once manufactured, it could potentially destroy equipment worth thousands of times more. Locomotives were expensive machines that required large amounts of steel, precision engineering, and skilled labor to build. Losing even a few engines could disrupt transport operations significantly. From a strategic perspective, the cost-benefit ratio strongly favored the saboteurs. Intelligence agencies recognized this advantage and continued developing similar covert weapons throughout the war. These included time bombs disguised as everyday objects and specialized demolition charges for infrastructure sabotage. The success of the coal torpedo reinforced the value of unconventional warfare. It showed that small, targeted actions could produce outsized effects when aimed at critical systems. For Germany, the growing number of sabotage incidents forced authorities to allocate resources to security and counterintelligence. Guards, inspections, and investigations all consumed manpower that might otherwise have been used at the front lines. Thus, the fake coal campaign not only destroyed locomotives, but also diverted valuable resources away from combat operations. Despite its effectiveness, the fake coal operation remained largely hidden from the public during the war. Intelligence agencies preferred to keep such tactics secret to maintain their advantage. If the enemy discovered exactly how the sabotage worked, they might develop countermeasures. Therefore, many details were classified until after the war ended. Only later did historians uncover documents describing the coal torpedo and its role in sabotage operations. These records revealed how carefully the devices were designed and distributed. Some were manufactured in specialized workshops, operated by intelligence organizations. Others were produced in small batches by resistance groups using supplied materials. The secrecy surrounding the operation made it difficult to measure exactly how many locomotives were destroyed. However, reports from the time suggest that the devices caused significant disruption. Even when they did not completely destroy engines, they often caused enough damage to require lengthy repairs. Historians studying wartime logistics emphasize that such disruptions could have far-reaching consequences. A delayed train carrying ammunition might slow a military offensive, while a halted fuel shipment could immobilize vehicles at the front. The cumulative impact of sabotage across multiple sectors gradually weakened Germany's ability to sustain its war effort. Germany's reliance on railways made it particularly vulnerable to this type of sabotage. Unlike some other countries, Germany lacked large domestic oil reserves and depended heavily on coal-powered transportation. Steam locomotives were essential not only for military supply but also for civilian industry. Factories relied on trains to deliver raw materials and distribute finished products. When locomotives were destroyed or damaged, the effects spread beyond the battlefield. Industrial production could slow, and supply shortages might develop. During the later years of the war, Germany faced increasing logistical challenges. Allied bombing raids targeted rail lines, bridges, and marshalling yards. At the same time, sabotage operations like the fake coal campaign attacked the system from within. The combined pressure placed enormous strain on transportation networks. German authorities attempted to respond by increasing maintenance efforts and tightening security. However, the scale of the war made it difficult to keep everything running smoothly. Each destroyed locomotive represented another obstacle in an already stressed system. As resources dwindled and infrastructure suffered repeated attacks, the efficiency of German logistics gradually declined. This decline contributed to the broader weakening of Germany's war capability during the final stages of World War II. Stories from railway workers after the war provide insight into how confusing these sabotage incidents were at the time. Engineers described sudden explosions that seemed to come from inside the furnace itself. In many cases, there was no obvious external cause. Investigators initially suspected mechanical failures, poor maintenance, or even faulty coal supplies. Only later did intelligence reports reveal the truth about disguised explosives. For the railway crews who experienced these incidents firsthand, the discovery must have been unsettling. The idea that a single piece of coal could hide an explosive capable of destroying a locomotive seemed almost unbelievable. Yet the concept was both simple and ingenious. It exploited a basic vulnerability in steam-powered transportation, the reliance on large amounts of combustible fuel. Because locomotives consumed coal constantly, they provided the perfect environment for a heat-triggered explosive device. Once the fake coal entered the furnace, there was no way to remove it before detonation. This inevitability made the sabotage particularly effective. Unlike time bombs, which could sometimes be discovered and diffused, the coal torpedo activated almost immediately when exposed to furnace heat. The crew had no warning and no opportunity to prevent the explosion. The fake coal weapon also highlights the broader role of intelligence and sabotage during World War II. While large battles and famous generals often dominate historical narratives, covert operations played a crucial role behind the scenes. Intelligence agencies gathered information, supported resistance movements, and developed unconventional weapons to weaken enemy forces. These operations rarely received public recognition during the war because secrecy was essential to their success. Yet, their impact could be significant. Sabotage efforts targeted factories, transportation networks, communication lines, and supply depots. Each successful operation disrupted the enemy's ability to wage war effectively. The coal torpedo campaign was just one example of this hidden conflict. By turning an ordinary fuel source into a weapon, Allied intelligence demonstrated remarkable creativity. Such innovations showed that warfare was not only fought on battlefields but also in laboratories, workshops, and secret meeting rooms, where new ideas were developed. As the war progressed, Germany increasingly struggled to protect its infrastructure from sabotage. Resistance movements grew stronger across occupied territories, and Allied intelligence provided them with training and equipment. Saboteurs targeted rail lines, bridges, and communication cables. Locomotive sabotage through fake coal added another layer of difficulty for German authorities. Even when rail tracks remained intact, the trains themselves could be destroyed from within. Security forces attempted to counter these threats by increasing patrols and monitoring workers. However, resistance members often blended into the civilian population. Some were railway employees themselves, making detection even harder. This constant threat forced Germany to allocate additional resources to internal security. Guards, investigators, and counterintelligence agents were deployed across rail networks. Yet despite these efforts, sabotage continued to occur. The persistence of such operations demonstrated the resilience and determination of resistance fighters who risked their lives to oppose the occupying forces. By the final years of World War II, the combined effects of bombing, sabotage, and resource shortages severely weakened Germany's transportation system. Locomotives became increasingly difficult to replace as factories struggled with damaged infrastructure and limited materials. Every destroyed engine represented a loss that was harder to recover. At the same time, Allied forces advanced on multiple fronts, placing further pressure on German logistics. Trains carrying reinforcements and supplies faced constant delays and disruptions. The fake coal sabotage campaign contributed to this broader pattern of logistical breakdown. Though it was only one of many tactics used against German railways, it illustrated how small, clever innovations could produce meaningful results. The destruction of locomotives not only reduced transport capacity but also undermined confidence in the system's reliability. For a military machine that depended heavily on efficient logistics, such disruptions could be extremely damaging. The story of the fake coal torpedo remains one of the most fascinating examples of ingenuity in wartime sabotage. A simple lump of coal, something so ordinary that no one would question it, was transformed into a powerful weapon. Hidden within coal piles across Europe, these disguised explosives struck at the heart of Germany's transportation network. They demonstrated that victory in war often depends not only on massive armies and powerful weapons, but also on creativity, intelligence, and strategic thinking. By exploiting a small vulnerability in steam locomotives, Allied engineers and resistance fighters managed to inflict disproportionate damage on a critical system. The campaign also serves as a reminder of the many unseen efforts that contributed to the Allied victory. While battles and generals dominate history books, countless covert operations quietly shaped the course of the war. Among them, the fake coal sabotage stands out as a brilliant example of how a single clever idea could disrupt an entire network and turn an everyday object into a weapon capable of destroying hundreds of locomotives.